Um, agenda additions, deletions, or changes in the order of agenda items. Hearing none. Number 3, open to the public for items not related to the agenda. We don't have anyone physical in the audience, but we do have a couple folks online. Is there anything? Brian? Yep, go ahead.
So it doesn't relate that much. Paul, what is the time frame on these the processing of the new zoning for S100? When are you expecting that to be approved and on the books?
Well, the timing is, ultimately up to the planning commission and the council to decide when they're comfortable with it. But we are targeting to have complete draft language at the end of next month for the commission to consider and be in a position when they're ready, that it represents, language that they're comfortable with.
Oh, cool. That's awesome. So then considering that, you guys have, some of you may have seen that there's a proposal from UVM to put like a dormitory in the hotel parking lot. Sorry, I can't tell you which hotel it is right now.
This is behind the DoubleTree.
The DoubleTree.
Sheridan.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when they were presenting at a meeting, I think it was last week or the week before, they indicated that in place of the parking lot, the hotel would make a parking garage. The parking garage will be 6 stories and the dormitory will be 5. I asked them if there was a particular reason why they were only building it 5 stories, given the, the efficiency of protecting, natural land area and getting the most out of our impermeable surface. And they said it's actually because of the zoning. So they actually brought up the map, and the T4 includes the hotel and where they're going to put their parking garage, but the dormitory is in the C1 R12. So as you guys were going through this and making these changes, I would encourage you to take a look at that area closest to UVM and see if you can't make that more dense, seeing as how we do have significant problems with housing shortages. The student population definitely spills over in sometimes problematic ways for mostly Burlington, but sometimes South Burlington. And we can just get so much more housing for the impermeable surface if we can lift that cap. It's also not in a place where it's going to be shading out neighbors or affecting a lot of other homes and neighborhoods. It's going to be currently next to a very tall parking garage. So consider that as you're going through this. And yeah, maybe I'll add a comment or two later, but hopefully I'll just be listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Announcements and staff report. Fran, you have an announcement?
Yeah, I just had one thing I wanted to mention. I get something from the New York Times called Canada Letter. It comes on Saturdays. And in last Saturday's version, there was, they mentioned a study on affordability that was done in Canada by a bank in Alberta called Alberta Central. And I think it might be available on albertacentral.com. But anyway, they looked at the housing affordability crisis, which exists all across Canada, and looked to see, to restore affordability, what would have to happen. And their results, looking at if you put 20% down on a house and that your costs could not be more than 30% of your income, your after-tax income. And they found all across Canada that to restore affordability, you could either lower the price of the house, lower the interest rate on mortgages, or raise income. And they found that in Canada, you'd have to have a 37% reduction in the cost of housing. you'd have to lower interest rates by 4.75% or increase income by 66%. Were saying that if you're going to restore affordability that way by trying to lower the price of the homes by building more homes, that's going to come at a significant cost to the current homeowners because they're going to see the value of their main asset stagnate for a long time or decline significantly. And they estimated that if income increased 4% annually, then house prices would have to remain constant for 10 years. So it's something, it kind of feeds into what we're looking at for 6,000 square foot lots, for, you know, smaller lots, smaller houses to get the price of the house down. But that's kind of scary. You'd have to,
Scary.
real big numbers for decrease. That was it.
Any other? Paul?
Yes, tomorrow morning, I'm having a heat pump installed in my house. And so I wanted to tell everybody that, and I'll tell you a couple weeks or 3 weeks, or whenever we have a meeting, how it's going. I want to put a plug in for everybody who's involved in this, which is Vermont Gas and Efficiency Vermont. The heat pump oops. Didn't turn my mic on. The heat pump cost $8,000 installed, which I think is a good deal. There's $1,500 off right off at the top from Vermont, from Efficiency Vermont through Vermont Gas. So the initial cost is $64.90, I think. After I have it installed tomorrow, I submit a form to Efficiency Vermont and get an additional rebate of $2,200. So the heat pump is just about half of, of the cost installed, which is tremendous. I mean, this is starting January 1st was the beginning of this $2,000 rebate from Efficiency Vermont. I think it's a great time to jump on getting a heat pump installed. I've got a forced hot air ducted furnace. The heat pump sits right on top of the gas burner. It'll be heated and air conditioned through the ducts. And it's not a, like 11 below zero heat pump. It works with the gas system, and when and automatically kicks in, whether you need gas or the heat pump to be most efficient. So that's the deal. I recommend it to everyone. You can also get,
Forced air.
huh?
Who has forced air?
Well, they also have
They-
non-ducted heat pumps
Mhm.
also,
Mhm.
so you have a non-ducted heat pump, yep. So that's it.
Sounds like a good deal.
One clarification on that, the $2,000 rebate that they have is income sensitive. So it doesn't apply to people in higher income levels. It's specifically focused on helping low income Vermonters be able to afford heat pumps.
Okay. Well, it's like lower income is like below $90,000 a year income or something like that.
For a family, something
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, there's 4 of us.
It's fine if you have forced air. If you have hydronic, in my case, they can't do it. There's heat pumps don't get up
Okay.
high enough, so heat pumps for my house would cost $30,000.
Not a good deal.
Or you can, I mean, what I did, I just put one in. I turned it on.
No, it's a combination, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, having an unducted one along with a, baseboard hot water system and a fairly complicated system with solar hot water and solar and everything. It's, I can still just use the heat pump 10 months out of the year. So it's, it just it comes with I have to put a lot of instructions you know, at the various thermostats when anybody who's not familiar with my house is in it. You know, because you have to know how to operate the two. It's not necessarily even intuitive right away. You know, eventually you get it, but you know, there's a little learning curve to figuring out how to have these two systems operating simultaneously and not have the gas one run except when the
Yeah.
bedrooms get cold. So,
All right.
Yeah.
I just want to say this is our last meeting before the election and one of our astute members is running for an city council seat. And I just want to say if you succeed, I wish you the best of luck there. And it's been a pleasure working with you. If not, we'll happily take you back.
Well, thank you. And I was not going to say anything tonight because who knows what's going to happen.
No, I just wanted to let out there that hopefully I speak for everyone else. It's been a pleasure working with you.
If I do get the pleasure of being elected, I will be back at your first meeting as someone out there to thank all of you, because it has been a pleasure and a privilege to be working with all of you.
Ditto.
We'll have a blanket toss.
And one other thing, just following up on Ryan's, Paul, did you take note of that? And is that something we should follow up on?
We have been in communication with UVM, and so we are in conversations with them on those subjects.
I have a question about that too. In theory, couldn't they buy TDRs for the 6th floor?
I don't think TDRs are usable in that zone or that.
They are usable in that zone, not for additional height, but for
Not yet.
additional units. But there's multiple ways that they can potentially be achieving their units in that area. They are currently in front of the Development Review Board at a sketch level that includes a master plan for multiple buildings over time. So even if the first one is 5 stories, if you consider changes over time, then they may consider other things for future buildings also. So.
Great. Staff announcements?
I don't think I have anything in particular, no.
I have a couple. One is that I'm excited to announce that today we signed a contract for kicking off work on the equity toolkit in planning. So we
Elsie was asleep at the wheel.
did
I forgot what you did today.
we did an RFP and we had some really excellent firms who really showed a really broad cross-section of how this could be tackled. Ultimately, we selected a firm called Civic Brand that has done work all over the country. And they're really, we were really interested and excited by how they really use a data-driven approach to think about how to systematically reach people in different ways. And have some really strong methodologies that they can help us with to do that. Understanding that, I think that we've identified that one of the biggest challenges we have is that we don't know who we don't know. So we're very excited to be kicking off that project. Lots to come over the coming months. Today was just signing of the contract. Similarly, we have engaged an architect, Greg Rabideau, to be assisting us with the updates to the form-based code that you talked about in the fall. Greg Rabideau has been practicing for several decades. He works out of South Burlington. He has done many buildings, notably the Blissby building on Shelburne Road is one that he's done. He's done a whole bunch of other ones, but that's just one of note. He's really excited to be engaged in this project. We were really excited to find him based on his experience in lots of different kinds of buildings, residential, commercial, smaller scale, larger scale, and really be excited to engage others in the professional field to give us some recommendations on how to achieve what you talked about. The third big project that we are doing, that we just did the RFP, launched it yesterday, is to seek a vendor for digital permitting and inspection services. So most of what we do in our office is done essentially on Excel spreadsheets. and emails. So a project, an application comes in, whether it's something as small as a shed or as big as an entire neighborhood. And we receive it essentially over email, and then we send it to the various departments by email, and we bring it back. And we track everything on spreadsheets of which application came in, what's its status, who's it gone out to, all that kind of thing. This software, we're really excited to, not just for planning and zoning, but for all entities that do various kinds of permits, whether it's an event permit or it's a dog license or it's a lot of the planning and zoning ones, to really move us into the next generation with this, to have the portal for applicants to be able to submit their materials, to track their materials if you happen to be applying for multiple projects at once, to see where they each are, to allow internally communication and version control of comments on various plans, whether internally or back to the applicant. Timely communication to applicants on their status of things, including, let's say, your permit was issued 11 months ago. Don't forget it's going to expire in the next month if you don't do X, that kind of thing, which drives everybody up the wall when people miss those deadlines. And then be able to do some of the back end of closing out permits and inspections and things like that. Donna?
Paul, does that by any chance, is it the same software or any way can tie into the one that the Department of Fire Safety is purchasing?
So
and
this is a
installing?
cross-departmental effort being led by our deputy city manager, who's also our fire chief. So they have some new software that is a call software, which is a little bit separate. So that's really tracking the response. We're working on the most efficient way in the RFP. Essentially, we wrote it both ways in terms of building code that the inspection team does. So we've given ourselves the flexibility to figure out what works best on that front.
So they can potentially talk to each other?
Potentially talk to one another. We've sort of bid it out that we want to know how they're going to relate to it.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we're very excited. We're on a thoughtful but aggressive timeline that we hope to be essentially launching the software to the public in the fall. So it's been a long time coming, and we're really excited about it to really help customer service and our own efficiency.
So I was referring to the State Department of Fire Safety.
So the State Department of Fire Safety, we do locally for South.
Right, I
Burlington.
know that.
Yeah.
So it is, okay. Tied together. sort
Well,
of,
we're
potentially.
asking in the RFP how they would talk.
Mhm.
We're not assuming one answer is the right answer yet. So, yeah. I think that's my list.
It's good to show
Those-
data.
All right. Number 5, Energy Committee request EV charging. I'm assuming everyone read the memo. It looks like the Energy Committee would ask that they have some more time to look into this. I don't know if you guys want to give us any background at all?
Sure, just briefly, as you know, the city adopted a climate action plan. The city prepared a implementation plan on the transportation sector. One of them is on the subject of EV charging for new buildings. There are also work plans for EV charging publicly accessible, which which we've submitted to the Regional Planning Commission, a project to do this summer. And then the big nut to crack is pre-existing buildings, but that's really a separate set of subjects. The Energy Committee has spent a little bit of time looking into the subject, exploring how the state's energy codes, the residential building energy standards and the commercial building energy standards have evolved. They evolve every few years. They took a reasonably large step forward this year on energy codes generally, but as is outlined in the memo here, for EV charging, there's sort of 3 basic categories of how one would treat the spaces in terms of the amount, the level of charging 1, 2, and 3, i.e. a normal plug in the wall, a household scale, and then the sort of fast charging of a few minutes, and then the amount that at the time of development, both the number of spaces and what those spaces mean. Does it mean that it has the wires that come all the way to the space, or that it has the conduit for a future person entity to put it in, but there's space in the electrical box? So the Energy Committee has spent some initial time on it. Their read on it is that while there has been some really good steps forward at the state level, they're recommending that South Burlington may still want to go further than the state energy code. And then, so they're really asking for a check-in here of, based on what they've learned so far, are you comfortable to endorse them to spend some more time working on this? I think that it may be a combination of both the number of spaces, but also, as I described, maybe in some cases, not necessarily more spaces dedicated to EV, but more of them, say, having the electrical pulled through the conduit, things like that. What else was I going to say on that? I think that some of the homework, we were speaking with the chair in the last few days, some of the homework that they might want to do is have some communication with the state entities who were involved in preparing the state codes, to understand why they made the choices that they made. Were they to, for example, sort of come up with a moderately good number statewide, or did they find that there was some breakpoints in financing, or who knows what? So they thought that that would be a good homework item, and they are excited to take it on should you endorse them to spend some more time on it. Donna.
This is a subject, anything having to do with RVs is something that's gotten a little complicated. It was supposed to have been adopted last year, but that was held up because of some changes that were made in the thermal envelope portions. And there's this organization called LICAR, which gets the legislative approval. And apparently they've made some more changes to it. And legally, they can't adopt that standard as of July. That's the RB standard. So that could complicate. I mean, this doesn't really have anything to do with the vehicle charging portion of it, which is probably fine. But the whole RBs can't be adopted because it requires, the changes that they've made require this whole process of review. It could take another 6 months before they do have all of the public hearings that are required to make those kind of changes. So I guess what I'm saying is that this probably isn't going to go into effect in July 2024. If it does, there's going to be some legal questions about whether or not it should have been adopted because it hadn't followed the required process for adoption. So I guess I would say that the committee should go ahead, the Energy Committee should go ahead and research that. And, potentially we could adopt it even before the 2024 RBs. That isn't even the 2024 version, I think. It was, I don't know what, I'm not sure which version it was, because it was supposed to have been adopted last year. But it has run into some issues
You're talking on the state level.
at the state level.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the RBs at the state level. It gets adopted by the legislature through this through this LCAR process, which I've never been involved in, so I don't really know exactly what that is. But in order to make the kind of adjustments that they've made in the thermal envelope section, which Lori can probably appreciate the complexity of thermal envelope issues when it comes to moisture migration and stuff. But that's the reason it was held up. But so that's my 2 cents.
Quick question. This endorsement, does it have to come in the form of a motion and a vote or just a nod of the head?
I think it would be helpful procedurally to have a motion that endorse them to spend time on it, and then maybe give them a date. We were looking at, I don't remember if we put it in the memo, but
July 2024.
I thought you said
to check in with you by July
Yeah.
2024. on their status, just so that it's stays on the table and they've got a target to work towards.
If we're ready, I'll so move.
Go ahead, Larry.
But I'm sorry, but before you do that,
Andrew,
hey,
what
hi,
can, what can we do for you?
thanks. Yeah, I was hoping actually someone from the Energy Committee would be here, but I guess I couldn't join. So just to clarify, so I'm the liaison to the Energy Committee, and so attended the meeting when this was discussed, and I think and then I asked Tim to play back for me the motion they passed, which I don't know, Paul, slightly different than I think the way you described it for clarity. So the motion, I'll just read it, was to ask the Planning Commission to update our EV charging requirements for new construction so they continue to be stronger than the baseline energy code now that the EV charging requirements in the stretch code are the same as the baseline code. The Energy Committee can assist and provide more detailed feedback if the Planning Commission requests. So the discussion I heard was to direct the Planning Commission to go ahead and update, and there was a document which they attached, which described the conclusion, draft conclusion of the Transportation Implementation Task Force that looked at this off the back of the Climate Action Plan to provide that EV capable spaces are actually EV ready in our draft. So I just and I don't, the Energy Committee discussed this as low hanging fruit. Let's just do it, right? In my mind, waiting to July really kind of is a significant deferral and continues to dig our hole deeper for new construction when there's not really a reason to do that. And then, so just to add kind of personally on this, the difference between EV capable and EV ready, as Paul was saying, is whether or not the actual copper wire is drawn through the conduit and whether there's a breaker. And I think that if you do that when the building is being constructed, it's a hell of a lot cheaper for the residents than for each resident to call back an electrician who has to travel to the building, do one line and leave, right? I mean, the aggregate cost of an electrician doing each spot is far in excess of what it would be if you just ran the wire at the time you're building the building. So I think there's an equity issue here too of just adopting EV capable and not insisting that the builder provide an EV ready spot with the wire already in place. So I would really encourage the Planning Commission to do two things: to adopt the chart in the new base code, which says where EV capable spots need to go, and then to enhance it by saying, but in South Burlington, instead of EV capable, it should be EV ready. And I really don't know why we shouldn't just do that right now.
Thank you for your feedback, Andrew.
Can I
Yeah, go ahead.
So Andrew, are you referring to table 2 in our packet?
Yes.
It has the CBS EV charging minimums, and your
As Donna was saying, that's really kind of my understanding, and Tim could confirm, like that's like all agreed and done. That's been there for a couple of years, and the hangup is the thermal envelope, not these charging standards.
Yeah.
Right. It's just kind of being hung up in the process. So I'd love to see us adopt that table, but with the caveat that where it says EV capable in South Burlington, it's EV ready.
So basically eliminate the EV capable column and move it to EV ready so that everything is EV ready in the table.
Yes.
And you're saying that this is your understanding of what the Energy Committee is requesting of us.
This is not what's in the initial paragraph of the memo.
Yeah.
I'll just read it. The Energy Committee requested that the Planning Commission enhance the standards. Didn't say specifically EV capable, EV ready, but that was the discussion. But I think the particular words in the motion that was passed by the Energy Committee was, again, it was ask the planning commission to update our requirements for new construction so they be stronger than in the baseline state energy code. Now that the EV charging requirements in the stretch energy code will be in the same as the baseline starting July 2024.
Where are you reading that, Andrew?
That's the motion that the Energy
Oh,
Committee made.
okay.
That's not in our packet.
Yeah, that's not in our packet. And
That-
Andrew, I
that's-
don't know if you have our packet, but the first paragraph
I
of
have your
this
packet.
thing is not in agreement with what you just said.
I
We
appreciate
paraphrased,
that,
so.
and that's why I wanted to clarify what the Energy Committee request was in their minutes.
So I have a question on this. I like what you're saying, but I haven't done the work that the Energy Committee did.
Mhm.
And I don't have the background to know what the cost implications are, et cetera. And I would like to make a vote with the knowledge of what the Energy Committee has done. And I'm wondering if there's a way for them to get us a memo sooner than July that really outlines what their recommendation is, so that, I mean, I could make a motion that says, let's change EV capable spaces to EV ready and vote to approve this. But I'm doing that without the background knowledge that the Energy Committee has gathered and prepared. So is there a way that we could get that information and then make an informed motion and vote?
Yeah, I mean, you could. I guess just one more point on this is that my understanding of this process, honestly, was that we adopted the climate action plan. Then there was a set of experts from Green Mountain Power, Drive Electric, GMT, other folks that convened for a year on a transportation implementation plan as a subset of the climate action plan. The recommendation from that group was to require a percentage of EV parking spaces to be EV ready. It feels to me and the Energy Committee, look at this, the Energy Committee doesn't have the expertise that Drive Electric has, doesn't have the expertise that Green Mountain Power has. They're going to have to go back to those folks that were engaged last year, and it goes around in a circle.
Hey, Duncan. Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
can't we just use the Energy Committee resolution or motion that they approved and the document to which they referred as the basis for the motion that you wanted?
I guess I'm not comfortable because that's not even in our packet. None of us have seen that.
So Andrew's correct. The motion was to request that the planning commission develop a standard that is higher than the stretch code, and that they're willing to assist in whatever mode possible. Our recommendation to you, and this is really your choice, but our recommendation is you've got Act 47 on your plate right now that is eating a lot of your time. To give that, what that recommendation of exactly how it should be higher, perhaps an efficient way to do it would be to have the committee give a specific recommendation to you.
Is there a
But-
reason for that to wait until July?
We
If
were
the- if
putting it
the-
as an outer time to be respectful of their time. You could say no later than, or you could make it earlier. We wanted to be respectful that there may be other things on their plate also, but it's really.
Just as a very quick reminder, they only meet once a month. So July is only like 3-ish
Sure, let's-
meetings
yeah.
from now.
But based on what Andrew said,
They were anxious to do this.
Yeah.
Again, they asked the planning commission to do it and said they will be ready to, help if requested. So I think they're anxious to do this.
so based on what Andrew said, if we do a motion that says, that requests that the Energy Committee get back to us with a concrete proposal at their earliest possibility, no later than July, then we could, at that meeting, take a vote to have it passed, and it could be as soon as next month.
It would still go through the same LDR public hearing process as
Right.
everything else. So
Mhm.
it
Right.
wouldn't be like a resolution that could be passed by the planning commission, but more or less you're on the right track.
But it would get it in the queue quickly. So as much as I'd like to just vote on it tonight, Andrew,
Yeah.
I really don't feel like there's enough information, and if we put out a motion to have the Energy Committee come back to us with a concrete proposal that we can look at and vote on, that would be awesome. And hopefully not delay it more than a month. Because time slips by really fast, I know.
Mhm.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's been 2 years since we passed the climate action plan, right? So it's things just
Is,
Would that be an acceptable solution to you, Andrew?
it sounds like the way to go now. I mean, I think we need to figure out as a city how we don't kind of spin around on things.
Yes.
But yes.
So
let me ask the other, is everyone else on the commission comfortable with what Lori is proposing?
Well, concrete, we'll have to define what it's a concrete proposal. What do you want? You want a whole technical language that we can adopt?
right now I'm looking at a table.
Never mind what we've got now. but-
Well, I'll tell you what,
Yeah.
we got a table that has the EV spaces, the EV ready spaces, and the EV capable spaces. What I hear Andrew saying is that they want to have this table modified so that the EV ready spaces, so that the EV capable spaces are moved to the EV ready spaces so that buildings are closer to being ready to have chargers.
Go ahead.
And I would like to see that handed to me so that I can say, okay, that's a table, we can vote on it, let's do it. So does that make sense to you, Andrew?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, I meant Mike.
Michael.
Is the table enough information for us to then have somebody draft the actual language for regulations that, are going to be piled up and eventually go to public hearing?
I mean,
Staff,
That would be a question.
I mean, time is of the essence, so
Yeah.
we're all,
can the Energy Committee coordinate with staff
Uh,
to get us a packet or
hold
a recommendation that is ready to vote on?
So I guess that was the primary question that framed this whole thing from the Energy Committee, is asking the Planning Commission to just go to some amount above the adopted state code is not very specific. And as we've noted, that Energy Committee, while not necessarily all technical experts on the subject, this is what their committee is tasked to do. So if with them coming back with the table, some additional numbers, whatever way they want to sort of cut it, like, we don't even know. My understanding from hearing what happened at the meeting and from Nick, who staffs the Energy Committee, is there are different there's certainly just making everything that's required by the state to be EV capable, to be EV ready. There's also, increasing the capable and then having a few less ready, but there's more total capable. There's all these other things that can be done. There's also some fire related questions when we're talking about a lot of our larger buildings, residential especially, being built with underground parking. If you require, if a lot of fire experts are recommending or requiring that EV spaces be outside and not under the building, or have a very expensive sort of fire retardant roof. There's a lot of technical things that are involved. So we were looking for the Energy Committee to provide their recommendations on a lot of those technical questions to the Planning Commission in a way that is structured, if not fully into language like Michael suggested, in a way that sets out the numbers that then we can go and make into the language that fits into the LDRs.
And the goal being that we would be setting the standard higher than what the state has.
That's the question. That's the question from the Energy Committee to you all, is, do you want them to pursue making all of those decisions about, or making those recommendations about bringing those standards above the state standards?
I heard from Andrew that was the request from the Energy Committee.
So, yeah,
And that in the memo that they sent you, they were requesting that we set a standard higher than the base state,
higher
Yes.
than the stretch.
yet higher than the stretch. So I would say that if we make a motion that says we would like the Energy Committee to, at the earliest convenience, get us a proposal that indicates what level of additional preparedness they want to be in the language, that they get that to us in a form that we can vote on and
Yep, and
have move forward.
And my only point is it does not, as Michael sort of alluded to, doesn't have to be the, sections and subsections and sub numbers and whatever that how it would fit into the LDRs. We can clean all of that up, but the critical numbers is the recommendations that the planning commission would need to review from the energy committee.
Donna?
Yeah, the Energy Committee would really have to go to the Vermont Department of Public Service to find out, because it is part of the commercial building energy standards and the residential building energy standards. I don't think that individual towns are allowed to make stricter standards than, because it is, I think if it wasn't part of RBs and CBs, it probably was perfectly okay to do that. But because it's part of RBs and CBs, there are certain conditions that say you're not allowed to go stricter than those
I
standards.
guess that's a question for
That's
our
that's
legal
something that we
counsel.
can
And also,
clarify their use. What the system used to be that there was a sort of a base code and there was a stretch
Right.
code. What the state has moved to now with this new version is there is no stretch code
Right.
option. So what Paul had mentioned before was Nick is intending to call again. He's been in touch with the sort of the guy at the state level and really discuss, is the reason that there's no more stretch code is because of something like that everybody is being pushed much higher than they were before? Or is it simplicity? Is it, they pushed it a little higher than before, but they want to allow towns to go higher? Like there's all sorts of
I
moving
think Don is
pieces.
also asking about our authority as a
Right.
village rule state to be higher, period, because the stretch code was something we were specifically
was allowed.
authorized to do.
Yeah,
So we can
we can. look
pose
into it.
that question in parallel
Yeah.
of our legal counsel while the energy committee is working on this.
And either the Energy Committee or you guys can get the answer to that.
Yeah, and my 2 cents on that. I mean, that was, when we lobbied last year on S100, that was a change that was in the initial draft that municipalities would be prohibited from enhancing the RBs and CBs. But we got that eliminated in the draft home bill. So I think we can. That was
Well, that's
was
something for the
lobbying.
people who are doing the work to find out for us so that we can then vote on it.
yeah, that actually has nothing to do with S100. The
Well,
RVs and
Andrew is
CVs are
correct, though, that
different.
there was in a draft of S100 a specific prohibition on municipalities having something higher.
Standard.
As a Dillon's rule state, we still
housing.
need the authority to do it, not
Exactly.
just the prohibition against doing it. But we can review
That
this
can be
in
sorted
parallel.
out.
It doesn't need to slow a process down.
Okay, so going back to the motion we're trying to create here.
Do I need to restate a motion?
Probably.
I think
Probably.
Stu would
Okay.
appreciate it.
Yeah.
I would move that the planning commission ask the energy committee to, at their earliest convenience, provide their recommendation for how the EV charging minimums get modified to address how they would like to see the city climate action plan implemented in this regard, and that they get us that proposal so that we can be prepared to make a vote on it with the clarification about our legal authority to exceed the standard.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Don?
Any more discussion? Andrew?
I'm wondering if you should replace the word modified with how they can be stronger, which is what their motion was to you.
That's fine with me if that's okay with everybody else.
How the code can be stronger.
Over
Yeah,
in the state?
how
Okay.
it can be, how it can be fortified.
I mean, technically the city can't require something less. So modification would have to be stronger.
Okay.
All right.
So either way, whatever motion.
Add, add strength, and I like that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, looks like we had 5-1. We had one opposed.
Right, I know, I wasn't sure, Paul might be wanted to share
Oh,
something earlier.
no.
Oh, yeah, I'm voting no because I just don't think that we need to do this. I think we could respond directly to the Energy Committee tonight and care of business and not throw it back at them.
Isn't that what we've done?
Oh,
Who seconded
we've
that?
thrown it. back at them.
Donna
That's what I think
seconded
we've
it.
done.
Yep.
I mean, it's pretty obvious.
I mean, it does point to a problem in intra-communications between the committee and the commission, in that I think Nick understood something other than what members of the, or at least some members of the Energy Committee thought they were asking for.
I didn't think that the Energy Committee was asking us to adopt this. I thought they were asking us to adopt something stronger than this.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
So I don't know what we could have.
But I just don't feel comfortable
Adopted.
making those strengthenings because I don't know exactly what makes sense. It's
Yeah.
completely out of my,
Just we've lost.
we've
because of
lost
the-
another month.
That's not chicken feed.
But I agree with Lori. I didn't have the information that I felt comfortable just passing something.
Um,
So. All right. Number 6, LDR updates, S100 Act 47, lot sizes, building types, and lot coverage. This is going to get exciting.
Getting into it. So we are circling back to a topic that we had discussed previously in concept with more specific numbers and looking for direction from the Planning Commission for those specific numbers to be able to move forward with writing our LDR amendments to comply with S100. As a quick background, this is again in the memo. The proposal earlier that the Planning Commission was generally in favor of is moving from calculating density in units per acre to only having minimum lot size, and to have that minimum lot size be determined by building type. So a single family home or a duplex could have one minimum lot size. A small multi could have a different minimum lot size. A commercial building could have a different minimum lot size. But it's not just in a certain district you have a minimum lot size. It's intended to scale appropriately with the type of building, acknowledging that a fourplex doesn't usually require 4 times as much land as a single family home. The bigger intention being to have our neighborhoods be able to infill as homeowners desire to do so, either with separate buildings or with conversions of single family homes to duplexes or to 3 or 4plexes, in a way that is aesthetically consistent, instead of suddenly having a very large lot with a ton of grass with just one 4plex on it that really sticks out from the single family homes around it when they may be of very similar scale. Sometimes the lots can make things stick out more instead of stick out less. It also accomplishes a lot of the city's goals about walkability and bikeability, population density to support additional transit service, efficient use of municipal services like water and sewer. It sort of ticks a lot of boxes on top of simplifying the LDRs instead of having multiple calculations that reach the same thing. So that's where we were before. Alongside this was the proposal that, again, the Planning Commission indicated was you were generally in favor of is simplifying our principally residential zoning districts into 4. 1 being low scale, primarily residential, which would be what is currently R4 or less dense. So 1, 2, Lakeshore. There's a few others. Most of the southeast quadrant where there would be water and sewer service, and the R4, R1, R2, etc. 2 would be the medium scale, principally residential. So that would be what ours currently R7, R12, Allen Road, Swift Street, things like that, that are a little higher density, more likely to have multifamily dwellings or townhouses, and often are transitional areas between the lower scale residential and maybe more mixed use commercial areas. And then 3 is the most mixed use of these 3, being the higher scale residential and commercial. Again, these names are all TBD. It's just, I've been shorthanding them as 1, 2, and 3. That would be our C1, R12, C1, R15, and similar. We had proposed to keep C2, C1, Auto, C1 Air, and a handful of others out of that because of differences in the allowed uses, but to have the same residential standards, so the same, building types allowed and things like that, all effectively along the Shelburne Road corridor and parts of our other denser parts of the city. And then finally, Queen City Park is number 4 because it's its own thing.
Because
Just because they're a special group over there.
Are the lot sizes really smaller there?
Yes.
yeah,
I mean, I know
0.18,
some, a few of
Do you
them
wanna-
are really tiny, but.
less than 1/10 of an acre.
Oh.
Oh, wait,
Yeah.
But if somebody wanted to recreate Queen City Park in another spot somewhere near the lake and give it that old timey feel,
so,
could they do that as a PUD?
so the traditional neighborhood PUD gets close to some of the Queen City Park elements. In Queen City Park, there's also, just as Lori can attest to, there's a lot of very uniquely Queen City Park things. So there's a lot of standards that are, if your property is less than 2 feet, if your house is less than 2 feet from the adjacent property, like numbers that are really, really predate any zoning, where the relationship to houses and lot lines is not as
If part of your house is on your neighbor's property.
Right.
I mean, let's get right down to it.
That's really not
So-
conforming.
It's non-conforming, yes.
To be really good friends.
And so to try to sort of pack that in with the other ones means either creating, a whole bunch of exceptions that really aren't appropriate to the other ones, or putting all the people in the Queen City Park neighborhood in a really, or the properties there, in a really awkward position of things that would seem like normal renovations just
Can't happen.
can't happen. So
Well, and the reason I ask that is because some of the existing neighborhoods, if you try to figure out, how would you put a second unit or even an ADU on some of these lots, say in Orchard neighborhood or something like that, some of the smaller lots there that aren't tiny, but they put the original houses right in the middle.
Yep.
And it really makes it hard to kind of do an addition. I mean, I think you were showing it could be as little as 5 foot side yard or something like that, which
Some of the proposals. yeah.
would probably be necessary, and in some cases, maybe with an exception of the neighbor kind of, or maybe somebody has 2 lots and they're doing something in conjunction and putting something between the 2. It just seems like it's nice to have an exception to be able to do a 0 lot line with approval, with adjacent.
well, let's get it, let's
approval.
work our way into that level of specificity.
Yeah.
I think maybe let's start a little bit higher for everybody, and then we'll get down to that, because you are getting to the sort of root of the matter here.
So these categories are these 1, 2, and 3. In
Yep.
low scale, assume minimum lot size is 8,000 square feet, and then in zone 2, it's 6,000, and in Queen City Park, it's amphibious or something like that. But then you get to building type.
So
How are you going to?
let me just back that up for a second. What I've actually proposed, which is up to the commission to discuss, is to actually not have minimum lot sizes vary by district. So a single family home could be built on a 6,000 square foot lot, this again, proposal, in 1 or 2. It wouldn't matter which one you're in.
Any district in which single family homes are allowed.
Yeah.
Other than Queen City Park.
Right, which is 1 and 2.
Right, I know, I'm just trying to be
Yeah.
more general in the statement.
Right, where then, the medium scale residential allows sort of medium scale multifamily. It allows sort of the 5 to 12 unit multifamily that's not allowed in the 1 district. And the 3 district allows even bigger buildings, but likely, as again recommended, may not allow a single family home or duplex because the intention is much higher density in those areas. So instead of it varying from a single family home in any district it's allowed would have the same minimum lot size. It would just vary which types of buildings are allowed in which district. So if you were building a 4-plex, you could build it in any of the districts on the same lot size.
Except you couldn't build it in 1.
A 4-plex you could.
Okay.
that is the extent of the definition of building type. Is it a single family house? Is it a duplex? Is it a
Sort of.
triplex? Is it a quadplex?
So one thing that I did note in here is there are a few, so it was more based on aesthetics than necessarily number of units. So like a single family home and a duplex very often look similar to each other, whether they're stacked or side by side, they often don't look too dissimilar. We were proposing that a multifamily and a townhouse would be two different building types. So that something that is a fourplex multifamily building aesthetically looks like a single family home, a large single family home, but more like a single family home, where a townhouse is the sort of side by side vertical units. So it's again aesthetically blending in, and it would be up to the commission where these different types are allowed, but we thought that it may be something the commission wanted to consider to allow the different building types, even with the same number of units, the different appearances in some districts and not others.
That really worries me, because if you, from what you described, we're going to stifle innovation. I want my quadplex to be 4 of Habitat 67 pre-constructed apartments stuck together. Not something that we see here. Or I want my single family home to have corrugated iron siding and huge windows.
I'm not, so what I was just saying is to identify and define a few different housing types that maybe have a similar like 3 to 5, 5 to 7 units. Not necessarily that they would or would not be allowed in the same places, because there may be, you might want to have slightly different setbacks or lot coverages or something, or not.
Yeah, you
But
said they should look similar but different.
So I was just, we were identifying the different building types as being aesthetically different looking from each other. It is what's already in Article 11C as our building types that apply to TNDs, that something like a townhouse is different than a small multifamily. That same structure was proposed to continue citywide. That's up to the commission, whether you want to just care about number of units or if you want to care about aesthetics. We were also basing this somewhat on feedback we've gotten from the commission before about transition in some neighborhoods where if someone wanted to convert a large single family or add an addition to convert a single family into a 3-plex, say, maybe it's sort of a stepping stone in between, that instead of it looking like Habitat 64 or 67, it looks like a large single family home, and aesthetically it's not as jarring to the neighborhood.
I do want to be careful. We're not necessarily proposing architectural.
No.
When you're using the word aesthetic, you mean sort of
That's what-
scale wise,
Scale.
not
More
architect-
You're talking about neighborhood aesthetics.
right.
That is town,
Talking about
that is town planning.
Right.
I
It's
mean,
essentially massing. So there is a little bit of architecture in our current regulations where, for example, if you're a duplex, only a certain percentage of your front can be garages, so that you don't wind up all garages, and that garages are set back, that there's a door facing the street, that level. But I think you're really speaking more of the form of townhomes is a different form than a multiplex, of a variety of different ways that you could do a multiplex, not the architectural design thereof, whether it's a flat roof or pitched roof or all those.
Well, I think Michael makes a good point that, there are a lot of types of configurations of houses that are not included in that current list. And we don't want to limit people to just what's in the list. So either we expand the list or we say, I think we do want to suggest that we can allow for things that aren't, just what we've seen before.
Sure. And I think, just taking a step back to what the commission had talked about before and what the proposal is we're really talking about scale. That, removing density means that if somebody happens to have a quarter-acre lot in the middle of a neighborhood, what is the scale of what they can put in terms of a number of units that would be and a massing that would be appropriate in its context. I think that's really the key thing. And, we're going to be talking a little bit regarding lot coverage and building coverage. There's an idea that came out of Burlington that they're proposing in their neighborhood code that we wanted to get your read on about this scale question.
I want to just throw a question in which relates to what Don and Michael were saying. The article that I sent a while ago from the New York Times about the building small.
Yep.
About building really small.
Yep.
And I want to make sure that what we do doesn't preclude that happening somewhere. We could put 400 square foot units neatly on this piece of property and do it in a way that is different than what we've done before, so it doesn't quote meet those massings that you're talking about, but could be a really appropriate use of space.
Well, there's no prohibition to building small that I can see now.
I'm just asking if what you're proposing
Lot size.
would allow those kinds of
Lot sizes.
options to happen.
So there is something currently in Article 11C that is, the housing type is called a cottage. So it's a smaller version of a single family home. And I was just pulling, I was listening, I was just pulling up those current standards. So
Like
that would be
three cottages.
a total, yeah. So it's a total footprint of 1,200 square foot or less on a small lot that fronts on a local street or shared courtyard with limited front, side and rear yards, equivalent of single family dwelling. Minimum lot size would be 1,200, the lot area may be reduced to 1,200 square feet in a cottage court. So it's reducing the minimum square feet in a cottage. A cottage court could have as small as a 1,200 square foot lot and have a home on that lot. If you're set up in the court, if in a court format,
Yeah.
if a standalone, just one cottage would require a minimum of 3,000 square feet. And this is the structure in the current TND.
Okay, that's only in a TND though, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
So, one of the things that we're trying to be mindful of here is that under Act 47 S100, essentially wherever a single family home is allowed, a duplex is allowed. So we want to make sure that when you're right sizing it,
Yeah.
that let's say you say 3,000 square feet is acceptable, that you're also comfortable that that could be a duplex on that same piece of land. Likely, if a TND is an option, then if we've met all the minimums in the standard, then if somebody chooses to be a planned unit development and has a TND and they do other choices, they're welcome to do that too. But
Is there a way for this to be more universally adoptable than just the TNDs?
so yes, absolutely. And there's a couple of different ways that you could do it. You could do it by just saying the minimum lot size drops, period. We've drafted it at 6,000 square feet for a single or two family, but you could say 3,000 square feet. Or the form of the cottage court, which is like a little miniature planned unit development, as exists at Kirby Cottages and some other places, you could enable that to say any parcel of 1 acre is, or whatever number you choose, is eligible to have this form. So it wouldn't necessarily say every single lot can be 3,000 square feet, but if you have an acre, 3/4 of an acre, 2 acres, wherever you draw the number, you can have a cottage court of between 4 and 9 units or something like that. So there's a couple different ways that you could do it, depending on what your objectives are.
I think that there were 2 articles that I saw. I'm not sure if I sent them both forward, but I think that this is something that's coming and that we need to plan for. And what was in that article was pretty aesthetically pleasing. And so I want to make sure that we're providing that kind of flexibility in the code so that we really can have innovative options for people who have a lot that they want to do something innovative on.
Yeah, and if you saw the units, the prefab units that they had, it was a net zero prefab unit. Those were not inexpensive, but I could imagine that the courtyard type of arrangement would work well for units like that. that are really quite small. I think those were what, like 65 feet by 12 feet?
They were small. They were
10 feet by 60 feet or
200,000
something like
square
that?
feet.
Yeah, I think it was only about 600 square feet and it was great living space
Yeah.
and it was everything. It was self-contained too. I mean, you'd need, but I just don't want to preclude that somebody could do, you know, like a small neighborhood with perhaps 8 or 10 or 12 of those on a lot. Because it could look really nice if it was well planned.
Are you talking about offsite pre-manufactured
Yeah,
and then assembled?
yeah, they're, you know, it's like,
They could even be on-site units. I mean, prefabrication has
prefabri-
efficiency, but it doesn't. I've seen some really nicely built, small, buildings that were not prefab that infill really nicely.
yeah, it could be either one. I
Yeah.
think it really depends on whether anybody in Vermont is able to scale up building something like that,
Mhm.
you know, to make them less expensive, because you're never gonna build it site built as inexpensively as you can at scale in a
Yeah,
facility.
No, the offsite manufactured or factory manufactured homes are at least, at most 80% of the cost of a build on site
Right.
and probably less. But it's early in the development of that industry, but there's a
Well, there's
couple of
slight
companies are
costs.
doing it.
But how they get built isn't important to me. What you're allowed to build is.
Right. Right.
And,
Although there's a certain different aesthetic
and I,
in those
well, there can be, but
pre-made ones.
I know there's the concern of neighborhoods having a shock factor of, oh my God, my neighborhood's gonna all of a sudden be really different than I thought it was gonna be. We have to be sensitive to that, but if there's a way to work this kind of flexibility in, I think it's really important.
Yeah, I think that having some version of the cottage building type and the cottage court sort of building arrangement allowed citywide, I think is, from just my personal perspective, I think is a great idea. I think we're going to have to think through, Paul and I and probably our development review team, what the parameters on that need to be to allow for, you know, sufficient access and open space and all these other things that we deal with in the larger neighborhood developments, how that applies in the smaller ones. Because something like 10% or 15% of a lot as civic space may not cut it if you're on a much smaller lot. So just really working through some of those on a just theoretical basis. I think we'll need to take some time to do that. I will say that there's some of what I'm seeing that I would see is a maybe stepping stone to some of this is the ADU program.
Mhm.
So having people allowed to put ADUs like on their back of their property or attached to the back of their home or whatever it may be, it alleviates some of the access issues because maybe they can share the driveway. And it may be just one sort of cottage in a backyard. Over time, it may be more, but it's more of a gradual thing than possibly taking 2 acres and dropping 10 small homes on it, 20 even
small.
20 small homes on it. It's a little bit of a different, as when you mentioned shock value, it's a little bit different. Like having one neighbor put a 600 square foot ADU in their backyard is
It's different than
it's
getting 20.
different.
The,
Right.
the good news for you is that in your city center form-based code, you do have a cottage court type. And also, several years ago, there was a working group established by the city to look at this cottage court arrangement.
Mhm.
And they did produce recommendations. So they've been awaiting a time to be brought to light. So if that's sort of an avenue that you'd like to look at, some of these questions you're asking about open space and things,
Yeah.
they did explore that a few years ago. So we can certainly bring that forward to you. The other approach that you could look at, but might be more of the shock value, is just really dramatically lowering the minimum lot size to where
Yeah.
everybody could just divide their parcels, if they have a 8,000 square foot lot, into 4 lots, period.
Yeah.
That wouldn't necessarily bring with it a form of a cottage. It would just be dividing it in 4.
Yeah.
So if that
Mhm.
was your direction, I think we'd want to sort of think about the implications of that. We do have some mapping to share with you about what it would look like what proportions of lots are at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Today, to understand the implications of at least the drafts that
Yeah.
are in front of you.
And would conditional use be a mechanism for being able to allow some of these innovative things with a little more control?
So you're gonna hear my own personal bias here. My own personal bias is I
You hate
generally
it.
hate conditional
Okay,
use.
yeah.
I think that if the city has criteria around which it can determine good versus bad, then let's write those criteria in there.
be done.
Conditional use statewide gets used as a like, well, we couldn't think of why we might like it or not like it, so let's leave it up to a DRB. And
Yeah.
it really is unpredictable for everybody, and it puts the DRB in a really uncomfortable position.
Been
So
And so whether I'm at this table again or not, I hope this conversation continues in terms of this flexibility for housing types.
When you're gone, the possibly will cease. Absolutely.
Thank you,
Um,
Michael.
We haven't answered staff's first
Yes,
question
I
yet.
was gonna get to that,
We're
Michael. Good man.
an hour and 10 in.
Yeah. So that first question there about two sets of standards, I think, Lori, you were kind of talking about that. The TND or calling out the smaller ones is kind of what we were just discussing.
Mhm.
The other standard would be, you're talking about would be the 6,000 square foot lot. Is that what that's the other standard?
That would be that was what I'm saying would be the citywide standard that's slightly higher than the TND standard
Mhm.
now.
Yep.
And the reasoning behind this, and I think I put this out in the memo fairly well, is the TND has a lot of design criteria and other requirements as part of it. It's supposed to be sort of a whole planned development, and all the pieces work together, and the civic space requirement is higher, and there's all sorts of things that are required if you do a TND. And what the developer would generally get out of that in a very broad brush way is some of them as that the minimum lot sizes would, and some of the other dimensional requirements are generally a little lower. So there's some more flexibility, and developers will likely be able to get more units into a well-planned neighborhood. So
while also having to do more civic space, as you said. So
right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's really thinking of the whole neighborhood as a whole, where minimum lot size could be that you own a lot and you want to divide it in two, and you have no obligation to provide like this additional civic space or this additional, well-planned walking path or whatever it is that's required in the TND. So having that lot size requirement be slightly higher is something that protects that a little bit.
So when you say allowed building types would be set by district, but lot sizes would not vary, what do you mean? They would not vary
Between districts.
Ah.
So each building type would have a lot size. That's what I mentioned before, that if you're a single family home, you'd be on some number of square feet, no matter where you were in the city.
Okay.
But if you were in a TND, that lot size would be could be a little bit lower.
Makes sense.
Are we generally in agreement with the two sets of standards?
Mhm.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay,
Progress.
progress.
okay, so for the next part, the next question, I'd love to bring up a map if that's okay.
Sure.
So do you want to tee up the question?
Yes. So we did a little bit of data analysis, as you requested at a previous meeting, of the existing lots in the city. There are approximately 3175 lots in our lower scale residential area. So that's that one district. Filtering out for road parcels. So there's a few dozen more that are actually just the roads. And we are focusing on that area because these are the areas of the city that already have generally smaller lots that would be constrained by these minimum lot sizes. When you get into other areas, like even the commercial areas, the lot sizes tend to be larger. So if you wanted to subdivide it, there'd be little sort of restriction on that here. Under Act 47, the city cannot require a minimum lot size more than 8712. So it's the equivalent of a fifth of it is a fifth of an acre. It's
Yep.
the equivalent of 5 dwelling units per acre as required by S100 Act 47. But you can set your minimum as anything. You could set it as 0, or you could set it at 8712, and anything in between that is completely fair game.
Mhm.
Paul is shaking his head at me.
Well,
Some technicalities that we don't need to discuss at the moment. I went through and calculated how many lots were in sort of these different logical breakdowns of square feet. So under 6,000, 6,000 to 7,000, 7,000, 8,000, and then 8,000 to 8,700. There are actually 88 lots, some of which are not built lots or not buildable lots. They're little corners and little slices and things like that are just historical remnants of how things were developed pre-zoning in some cases. But there's very few actual buildable home lots that either have a home or don't that are under 6,000. This map that Paul has pulled up here, we're looking at orchards. There's actually nothing in here that is under 6,000. So there's nothing red. Anything that is sort of pale yellow is between 6 and 12,000 square feet. So that would not be able to be subdivided. There's no way of subdividing anything that's under 12,000 square feet if your minimum lot size is 6, because you can't get 2 6s with anything less than 12. As I noted in the memo, practically speaking, it would be very rare to actually be able to divide a 12,000 square foot into 2 exactly 6,000 square foot lots. There, as Donna sort of alluded to, there are access issues. There's where the existing home may be. It's buildable locations issues, like there may be wetlands or there may be other things. So actually having 12,000 square feet that you could truly cut down the middle is fairly rare. The green, or kind of bright green color, is between 12 and 18,000 square feet. Those are hypothetically divisible into 2 lots. As I noted, towards the lower end of that, closer to 12, it gets more difficult. Going up towards the top, it's a lot easier. And then the navy blue, stone blue.
How do you even divide a lot like that? If it's got maybe 80 to 100 feet frontage on
this
the
is
road.
really a
Really
mathematical
hypothetical.
expert.
Math.
Yeah.
It's not looking at specific homes and how could you kind of get around with the driveway or anything else. This is just in perfect conditions. How could you divide a lot into 2 lots? So there may be a good number of those green lots that actually are practically not dividable because there's no way to get around the current house, or the driveway is not suitable, or there's wetlands on the back half. There's all sorts of things that may prevent actual subdivision. But this is just by the numbers, what would hypothetically be divisible would be those green ones between 12 and 18,000. The sort of stone blue color is the 18,000 to 22,000 approximately, because then the gray is half an acre and above. So there's another gray color that's sort of blending in on the screen, which is kind of unfortunate, but there's another gray color that is above a half an acre, which again, then is easier to subdivide, and there's more flexibility because there's more space.
Though most of them have that same logistical problem.
Most of them do, but some of them, because of how they're shaped, actually, it's not quite as bad.
So I think, so there's a couple of different versions of this that Kelsey put together where that we can pull up of where this is going on. If the minimum was 6,000 square feet,
Yep.
6, 12, 18, then we've got the same map that we can pull up of 7, 14, 21 and 8, 16, 24. What was really helpful when you described this to me earlier today was, or last week, was this is sort of to represent kind of an order of magnitude. So contemplate that every single family could become a duplex. So all the yellows, in theory, understand that practically that can't happen, or wouldn't happen in our reasonable time frame. Which ones could conceivably be divided in 2 and therefore have a home on each? And so and, you know, different neighborhoods are a little bit different from one another. So I'm gonna take the least interesting background to just kind of give you a little background here. So you'll see that the Orchards neighborhood, the inner orchards, have a lot of this 6 to 12,000 square foot lots, and the outer orchards have some larger ones.
Mhm.
The Butler Farms neighborhood typically has slightly larger lots. The Village of Dorset Park is generally quite small. Chamberlain is sort of a mix of some small and some medium and some tiny,
And actually, the highest number of lots under 6,000 is in Eastwoods.
right? And then Eastwoods is, Paul, you're gonna have to explain Eastwoods. It has everything.
A little red lot on the right side, right there.
Yep.
415,000 just went on the market.
Yep.
Yep.
Most of the
15.
most of the red lots in Eastwoods, I did click through some of these just to make sure there wasn't like a data error or anything. They're mostly like 5,500 square feet. So it says it's under 6,000, but it's there a lot of them are pretty close. It's not like they're, 2,000 square feet. They're mostly over 5.
On the 6,000 square foot lots.
Mhm.
Someone decides to put a duplex on that property.
Mhm.
They wouldn't be able to condoize it, is that correct? Or could they?
Do what?
Turn it into a condominium.
So,
I think they could.
so what our legal counsel has told us about this is that the form of ownership is not something that under Vermont law we have authority over.
Okay. So they could become condos.
I think yes, they could become condos. I think what they probably could not do is divide, like if they were side by side duplexes, have a lot line down the middle and have the 2 lots on each side then be
They're smaller than.
smaller
lot,
than
yeah.
yeah.
So they could be
You could have
condoed one lot.
condo land or
Condo
or
land, yeah.
common land with the building.
Okay.
That has a shared ownership structure. But I think you couldn't
So they
necessarily
could in
divide.
fact have 2 owners on that property.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Like if the question is, would it have to be an owner and a renter? I think the answer is no. I think you could
Okay.
have 2 owners.
So if you're one of the yellow ones
Mhm.
and you want to rebuild.
Mhm.
And we said you could have up to 4 units on a 6,000 square foot lot. If you could fit it within the setbacks, you could actually make 4 small houses on
It
a
would have to
yellow
be a
lot.
fourplex
Be a
in that
fourplex.
instance.
Yeah, it couldn't be 4.
A building that contains 4 units,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
Right,
Habitat for Humanity,
Right,
for example.
yes.
Yeah.
But that,
Not
Yep.
4 buildings.
right,
Right.
1 building, 4 units.
Yeah.
As
If
long
you-
as it fits within the setbacks.
Yep.
It could
Yeah.
go on a yellow lot.
If you set the, there's an option currently for the city to set small multifamilies, 3 or 4plexes at a different minimum lot size as a single family home or duplex. I did preview in the memo that that is something that's on the table at the state right now. And there's so many drafts of things floating around at the state that we actually can't get a good read on where that's going and if it's going to be moving forward. But it may be in the next month or so that we get a good indication that that is off the table, and anything 4plex or below has to be the same lot size.
But the 4plex would still be constrained by the,
It would still
building-
be constrained by setbacks. It would be constrained by whatever version of coverage you choose,
lot coverage or building coverage.
building or lot coverage or
And
both,
building height.
height, any other standards. Yep,
Are you still referring to it as a duplex if it's a 1/1?
yes.
Yes, in the
An
TND,
upstairs,
we talk
downstairs.
about them in that building type as being side by side versus stacked. The statutes just call a duplex a duplex.
just a duplex.
Two units in the same structure is a duplex in all ways, shapes and forms,
Mhm.
unless it's an ADU.
Right.
Um,
So they have to be the same size, basically, or similar size if they're a duplex.
No,
I don't know. if
not
they do.
necessarily.
Well, I mean, what makes an ADU an ADU? It's like half the size of the main unit?
there's limits on it, but by doing something smaller that fits into that ADU box, you get some streamlining of process. And it's, ADUs are generally, my understanding, and everybody can correct me, are often added to an existing structure. And therefore, like, they're getting permitted by themselves. Where a duplex, if you're building a duplex, you're going through a different process of permitting and you may have some sort of different requirements.
Also, an ADU often is not in the same building.
Off,
It is its
yeah.
own structure
can
on
be.
the same parcel.
The-
Not,
the-
not
the-
always, but it can be.
Mhm.
The ADU in my house, it's a 400 square foot ADU that's within the 1,600 square foot house.
Right.
It's half of the second floor, and it was done when we renovated.
So conceivably, that
yeah.
you could make the choice of having that be a duplex. If
In-
you wanted.
In the
as
future,
one-
I could do
in the
that, but I
future.
couldn't do it in Queen City Park because it's not allowed with the zoning.
Except S100
Except
says that wherever you
nowadays.
can have a single family, you can have a duplex.
So I could now turn it into a duplex.
Yes,
And I could-
However-
And I could, and I could condoize it and sell the,
Right.
Okay.
yeah.
Well,
You
and,
see, there's your retirement plan.
well,
Mark.
oh
and-
man, there's my retirement, yes.
and there's balances to it too. So in a duplex, it's subject
Oh, we go with
to,
that, Lori.
the second unit of duplex is considered an entire dwelling unit, and so therefore it's subject to all the impact fees.
Yep.
For example, whereas an accessory dwelling unit is not subject to impact fees. So there are reasons that somebody might choose either.
Mhm.
Just wanted to jump ahead and show the other calculations here that Kelsey had done. So we talked about this is what it looks like at 6, 12, and 18. If we take that same neighborhood and we move it to 7 and 14, you see that more parcels fall into the yellow category. Therefore, fewer of them would be eligible to be subdivided, for example, if you had, so the yellows would not be. So again, I'm just sort of toggling back and forth. Not surprising, lot size goes up. This seemed to be one of a more common break. And we can sort of toggle in any neighborhood that you want. I'll show you the 8,000 also, because what we found at 8,000 it doesn't change very much. There's very few lots that are between 14 and 16,000 square feet
Mhm.
or between 7 and 8. So that really doesn't make much of a material difference. There is a little bit of a difference when you look between, if you choose to be 6,000 versus 7,000, those who have the opportunity to theoretically, again, on paper, subdivide, drop a little bit.
The other thing that I just wanted to note, it's not the most important thing in the world, but when a lot of the lots that are created in the city are actually smaller than current minimum lot sizes for the districts that they are in. And so we're looking at, are we looking at 8? No, the number
Sorry.
right now, are we looking,
Sorry,
was
I
8.
forgot to turn that one off.
yeah.
So we're at 6 and then 7.
So the number of red lots goes up by quite a bit if you move from 6 to 7. Just looking at Chamberlain. So all of those red lots would actually be smaller than the required minimum lot size in the district. So moving it down to 6 actually makes almost all of the lots in the city that have current homes on them or are logically buildable for a single family home or duplex conforming to our zoning. It's not necessarily that we want to always be looking to that to sort of conform our zoning to what exists. There are reasons to create nonconformities to push things in a certain direction. But from just my perspective, it doesn't make a ton of sense to create moving it to 6 removes a good number of lots from being non-conforming that are currently non-conforming under our regulations. And if you move it only to 7, you correct fewer of those.
What happens if you move it to 5,500?
Then there's a few that are still red. There's not a ton. I don't think I have a map of exactly at 5,500.
But a lot of the red would turn.
So if Paul, if you want to go over
Sure. We can
to,
click on any
click
one
on
of these
one of them.
parcels. So this
There-
one is
go up,
5,800.
right?
So you'll see there's very few red ones that appear
Over
here,
in the
but
Eastwoods, there's a couple that are under 55. That's 5688.
scrolling over to Eastwoods.
So there's some little back parcels there that I think they're just remnants of how it was developed that I don't think would be developable. That one's 5381. So that one's under 55. Those 3 in a row right there are smaller.
54.
What's with that one on the right that's sort
Here?
of divided, it looks like one's like not.
My
accessible
guess-
Do you want to turn on the image?
My guess is that it was divided as a front, back, and there was a house that was sort of in,
You can,
The
you have to turn
corner.
off
There
the
is,
color.
there's a house in the back.
Okay.
it's sort of,
Yep, there's two homes.
probably to create a
Oh,
little
there you
yard there.
go, wow. Oh, I've seen that.
So how big are those
I
two
know what
lots? That one
55.
is
and
55, 45, that's 55, 45 and
53.
53, 84.
The reason I asked about 5,500 is there a reason not to go to 5,500 and
No,
get rid of 90% of the non-conforming lot?
not from my perspective. And I don't think changing that would, the number of lots between 11,000 and 12,000, that would have a functional difference in their subdivided, but I can't say that word today. Subdivisibility? Ugh. The number of lots that would be affected by that change on their actual ability to be subdivided is very low. So you would make lots conforming that are currently not. As you did see, there are a handful that are in the 53, 5,400 range. So those, you'd have to decide if those would be in or out. But the actual dividing of lots in other parts of the city would not be affected very much.
Favor of, personally, I don't know about anybody else, but I would be in favor of picking a lot size that helps us get rid of as many non-conforming lots as possible.
This minimum lot size would apply to, of the four districts you showed at the beginning or spoke about at the beginning, it would apply to the first two? Or
It would-
anywhere single family,
It would
home.
apply to the building type of single family home and the building type of duplex.
anywhere?
Those are allowed in 1 and 2 and Queen City Park. But Queen City Park will have its own thing going on. Generally, other districts, we are proposing that single family homes and duplexes not be allowed. Either already not allowed, like in C1 R15, you can't build a single family home. Or they may be nominally allowed now, but our intention in the city plan, future land use map and policy decisions that have been made is that if a new property is to be developed or redeveloped in those areas, it shouldn't be for a low density, low scale, single family or duplex.
Mhm.
So generally, yes, the districts 1 and 2 would be where these apply.
Do you have any information on other cities that are dealing with, or Burlington, what's their minimum lot size? I'm just wondering, has anyone gone down? to like
Burlington
3,000 or
decided to go away
4,000 or-
from minimum lot sizes, period, right?
Yes.
You can build on 10 square feet.
Excellent.
So what they've
They are
done
going to-
instead is they do lot
They have
coverage.
lot coverage. So really you can't build a house on a very small lot because you just won't have enough space in the lot coverage. I also mentioned them in the memo that this is again in the proposed neighborhood code that they're working on. Having a maximum footprint for a home. So there's
For a building.
For a
It's not
building.
necessarily for a home.
Mhm.
for a primary building and then another maximum footprint for a secondary building. I believe it's 1,800 square feet is a footprint for a primary building. So instead of setting a minimum lot size, they're setting a maximum building size and a lot coverage maximum.
So the plus of that is that, if you have a 2,300 square foot lot and you can fit a building on the 50% lot coverage, then you can. The minus of that is that you could, in our community where we have 7, 8, 9,000, that could become several lots. Again, that sort of shock factor. We were sort of intrigued by we'll talk about lot coverage in a little bit, but we have currently a maximum lot and a maximum building coverage. So as your lot gets bigger, you can have more of it, have a building, which if you allow multiple building types could be a bigger building. The way Burlington has dealt with this without having the lot sizes, minimums or maximums, is that the building itself caps out in these residential scale neighborhoods at 1,800 footprint, not total, but that means that you're essentially, if you choose to do a 4 or 6-plex, it's a relatively small one, like let's say the Habitat one, not necessarily a 4 times a single family, or a typical single family. So we do have Lori, on the fly here. This is 55, this is what it looks like at 5,500. I think if I did it right. So the red ones essentially go away.
Eastwoods would still have a couple.
Eastwoods has a few, but as we were just poking around, they're in like the 53, 54.
So just to show, this is comparing. Oh, what did I just do there?
I don't know.
Sorry, there we go. So this is at 6,000. That's at 5,500. So
So it looks like there are a few that are on that sort of 11,000 to 12,000 cusp that go green as well.
right, and
And
one or
there's
two.
one or two that go blue.
Like this larger one could theoretically then become 3 because it's probably.
Yeah, it's 17.
17,000 square feet. So, not saying it's likely to happen in the short term. I think, you know, Donna, your point, just in terms of thinking about the time frame associated with this, this is a very different kind of, as you know, development approach than what has happened in our city historically, which has been neighborhoods built in greenfield areas. This is one at a time with people figuring out how they might want to make it work. It's not likely to take place, entire neighborhoods changing overnight
Mhm.
based on the form of the neighborhoods.
So a question for you. It seems like what we're talking about is infill and trying to get, more houses in smaller areas. If we go lower, what are the drawbacks? Is that the suddenly infill gets too dense in some of the bigger neighborhoods? And what's you say if we went down to 5,000 or 4,500,
Mhm.
what's the downside? What do we?
So I guess the changes, which I think the commission has to decide is a downside or an upside, is more properties would become both theoretically and practically subdividable. So maybe at 6,000 square foot minimum lot size, the 12,000 square foot lot was technically subdivisable, but practically not. But if we went down to 5,000, it may be easier to do a 5,500 and a 6,500 to make that line work. So it going down in lot size would add flexibility to some of those lower lot numbers for dividing into two. I think if there was greenfield development, you could have a neighborhood of 5,500 square foot lots. I think what actually these red lots demonstrate is that that's not a terrible thing. That's a livable space. That's a livable lot with a single family home or a duplex on it. Springs,
And anything over 4 acres has to be a TND or conservation
Right.
PUD regardless.
which
So
fits has all those other requirements for civic spaces and design and distribution of housing types and a mix of things and all that comes with that PUD process. What else? I mean, I think,
I mean, when you look at some of those lots, it's like the deeper lots are the ones
Mhm.
that you realize have some real potential there.
Mhm.
As long as the house as long as you have enough room to squeeze by it on one side.
it's that, I think there's also,
Or just keep driveways in the front and just
Right.
have.
I
a
mean, I'll just
walking
pick on
path.
this
You
one. I
have
don't
to
know
have
anything
it.
about this parcel, but in theory, somebody could take down this garage here.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And if our regulations, allowed for it, you could have a second lot in the back
Yeah.
with a home there.
The other thing that's a possibility, that again would require some like-minded people and coordination, but I think you mentioned this before, there's a lot of these lots that you could have one access to a split driveway that creates lots that combine pieces of several lots. Maybe people who are going to retire and want to sell off a piece of their back lot, it's complicated and it would require some organization, but that's always a possibility that people can sort of combine their back two lot lines as long as there's not a wetland or something. And create a new lot that's accessed from a different direction or that, it's big enough because you kind of created it in between those two other things.
Mhm.
Those are all things that are made possible by some of these.
The other thing with the small size, you get smaller and then things are subdivisible potentially.
Mhm.
But because of S100 and because of duplexes and fourplexes,
Mhm.
Whether it's subdivided or not, I could still turn it into
Two.
two.
Yep.
So the subdivision issue becomes a little less
Double lots.
significant
It
because
does. I think part of the interesting point of the article that you sent around is that there are people who put a lot of value on owning their own structure.
Yeah.
There may be a higher market value in subdividing and having a separate structure on another small lot, people who want to buy a 5,500 square foot lot and put their 1,200 square foot house on it instead of being attached to someone else. I think having that, yes, it's 2 units, either way you slice it, but I think there's a difference in how things function.
I don't have to coordinate with someone else what I do with my yard.
Right,
It's a big deal.
right.
I mean, it's interesting when you go, I'm kind of near UVM and the hospital. And some of those streets in that area have some amazingly beautiful small cottage, small houses that were obviously not the original house, but they were squeezed in.
Yep.
And they're actually really quite attractive places, I mean, they've grown up with trees and everything, but
Don't-
so, I'm just kind of concerned that people are going to think, oh, this is horrible. It's like, what are you going to do to our neighborhoods? And I think it's always great to have examples to show people of, look, this is how this is developed in Burlington already. And it can be very attractive.
Duncan, I think Paul had his hand.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Oh, just when you're at Eastwoods, the lot sizes that you were looking at, mostly the yellow colored lot sizes are 50 by 125. And then there are larger lots that are actually double lots,
Mhm.
250 by 125 lots.
Mm-hmm.
But the 50 by 125 lots, so that's,
You're spot on, Paul.
Yeah.
and I think they're like 0.17 acres, 7,450 square feet. So they're not really, I mean, nobody can build a house in my backyard, I can assure you,
So,
Yeah.
That's how we go here.
Yeah.
Duncan, to answer to,
And
When I think about-
see where my lot is, see those 2 double reds?
Mhm.
I'm the yellow just below that.
You're
where
this
the
one, aren't
arrow
you,
is
Paul?
right there.
Yeah.
So, and it's not a big lot. I mean, I wish I had more space actually, The double lots are nice. There's a couple of double lots that are good. And there's quite a few really nice homes that have been built on the double lots recently, that have, there were tear downs and rebuilds. you know.
Mhm.
That green one next to the red one down there, or
Where-
maybe the blue one.
Yeah, on Meadow, yeah. Any of these green ones on Meadow. See the ones on the right, those green lots? Those are all nice lots. There's one yellow lot that is a tiny, tiny little house. I mean, it probably has
there's
2.
one that's a really small one somewhere in here, Paul.
It's right, that's that yellow lot right down there. And that has a tiny downstairs and a tiny upstairs, and that's it.
Duncan, you'd asked a question about sort of where's the line between the sort of 5,500 versus 5 or 6. It's tricky to figure out exactly where that line is. When I think about it, there's some sort of general planning theory around where you might ideally set your zoning in a neighborhood. And the idea in terms of sort of striking the balance between opportunities for investment and affordability and various different things, and sort of keeping a sense of neighborhood, is to set your zoning at sort of one step past what exists today, so that lots of folks can make an investment. And then 50 years down the line, if and when everybody has made that investment, then you set it one step beyond that as sort of the next iteration, so that you don't all of a sudden have, 8 plexes popping up in the middle of single family homes neighborhoods. But if single family homes have become 2s and 3s in, 50 years over time, then you think, oh, well, what's the next iteration of it? So I'm not sure that that there is a magic between individual numbers. And I think that that's what the data shows here, is that it doesn't have a massive effect, although, the effect is probably a little bit more strong in a place like the Pheasant Way or Butler Farms neighborhood, where you're starting with a sometimes 16,
Bigger.
18,000 square
Yeah.
foot lot. On the flip side of that, there may not be the economics interested in those neighborhoods as somebody saying, well, I'm going to tear down my house, divide it into 3, and then sell it, because ultimately, that's also an expensive proposition to take down a good home on a well-valued lot.
Yeah.
So
The incremental steps can make transformation very difficult, because we go this next step and I do what I can on this lot that just works. Then when you make the next step, it gets just like a lot of these lots, how do you put a second
that's true.
structure on them?
I guess I would look at, say, Queen City Park as a neighborhood that has gone through that first round. They were essentially all camps.
Well, they started out as tent sites.
So they've been through two
They've been a
10
few.
sites to camps to homes,
Yeah.
while keeping, I think, it's this
The
balance,
character,
right?
yeah.
While keeping the character of it, instead of, I'm sure that had we zoned it to say 8-story buildings in there, probably some 10 people would have got together and put some 8-story buildings in there, because how beautiful the views of the lakes
it's a
are.
lot,
That
yeah.
wouldn't be Queen City Park anymore.
That's
So I
right.
think that's the balance.
Yep.
And just as a reminder, Queen City Park is the way it is partially because it was 1880s or something that it started being developed. So when Paul's talking about turning over in 50 years and taking that next step, if you go tent to cabin to, year-round home, you're in the,
The realm.
2 to 3
Yep.
50-year cycles.
Yep.
So
And it's a separate topic, but as we're looking at densities and how we do this, as these neighborhoods become more dense, it creates a greater opportunity for a cafe or a corner store or so whatever, and maybe even a pocket park. But then how do we in the zoning create the opportunity for something like that to develop? In the orchards or somewhere else, an area that's designated that it could develop into sort of a community core.
Well, I think that, so one, I think you do have a proposal that you're going to be looking at of bringing some level of small scale commercial in. And I think we've been thinking about it from the perspective of, there may be some appropriate mid-block things like a little bit more of a home-based business. And there may be some things that are more appropriate at corners,
Mhm.
so that you've got some predictability. In terms of the parks, I think that, we're going to next year kick off a parks master plan, identifying areas. It's going to be in part a zoning, but it may be in part an investment component too. And looking at, not to pick on a parcel here, but right in the middle of the orchards here is a single family home on 3 acres. Is it something that the city might identify and target? And thinking about, the from an economic perspective, on top of the benefit to affordable housing of being able to see some duplexes here, is there's no more roads to plow, there's no more pipes to maintain.
Yeah.
If there's additional housing in this area. So the city begins to financially, there will still be potentially more fire calls or more ambulance calls because there's more people. But in some areas like Public Works, we wind up saving money that can start to be invested in things like parks.
Where's the school?
The school is right here.
Oh, okay. Oh my
So,
God.
in the essence of time, 6,000 square feet, are we comfortable with that? 5,500, what are we? We have a recommendation for staff?
Aren't we, we're gonna discuss 5,000 square feet under the 1974 exception, are we not?
I don't recall that.
That was for.
Lots 5,000 square feet
No,
or
that-
greater. And then you asked the question whether we want to conform to the pre-74 standards, but we're not gonna get there tonight.
Probably not. I guess, so
So, yeah.
on that first
6,000.
question, 6,000 or 5,500? I'm sorry, go ahead, Lori.
I think that is there a problem of saying, let's make it 5,000 instead of 6,000?
Yeah, really.
I mean, you've given some good reasons why it's a good idea to enable more flexibility on a 12,000 square foot lot.
Yep.
So why not do it? What's the downside?
I guess I would just, it's not necessarily a downside, but be cognizant of the state potentially allowing that to be a fourplex, maybe. So you're thinking of it as being a single family home on a 5,000 square foot lot, also thinking that that may be a fourplex. It's just a thought that occurred to me. Other than that, I think there's not a lot of difference.
And it gets rid of all the
Yeah,
non-conforming.
it gets involved.
Except for there's a few weird like corners and things like at Kirby Road
Yeah,
and
but-
Chamberlain. There's some weird leftover parcels that are separate for historical
I think
reasons.
the distinction at 5, there are a fair number of, I guess, there are some 10,200 square foot lots in the city.
Mhm.
So if you go from 55 down to 5, then you're allowing a division of 2. That's not necessarily a problem. It is just an
It's just
effect.
a-
If you go to the other scalable
What do
one,
the other commissioners think
Right.
of 5,000?
the one that doesn't say four
Yeah,
four intervals. Go to the,
I mean, I think
The
our goal is to
6,000?
try to get
I think that has more
denser
colors.
without, but not crossing the line of just cramming stuff in there and infill being like, oh, but we don't want that. I think I would be comfortable with 5,000. If we get below that, I think that's,
No.
No, I like the idea too of, where you have those, like 10,000, just being able to actually use that back rear portion of a yard, for, as has already been done in places, but it might be pretty restrictive if it's 6,000.
And with all the conversations about taxation and how it's impacting our city, this is a way to help take care of housing issues without putting excessive tax burden on the community because of the points that Paul was talking about.
Mhm.
So it's really, I think it's going in the right
Okay.
direction.
And again, it's not going to be an instant thing. It's going to be gradual because it does depend on a lot of individual homeowners making decisions, but even just enabling people to do it can sometimes get the wheels turning for people. And maybe it's something like a decision between an ADU and subdividing. That might be a financial decision that you have enabled to go one way or the other. So what number are you landing on?
5. So this is 5 now.
Do we need a motion for that?
I think a straw
Straw
poll
poll,
certainly, so there's something in the record that that you're all who supports that.
I for 5?
Straw poll was 5,000.
5,000 square feet. Yep.
Minimum lot size citywide for single family
Unanimous.
homes. and
All right.
businesses.
In terms of where the fourplexes land under state law, we will probably have a pretty good sense as to where it's gonna go. And almost certainly by the time this work is in front of council in public hearings, we will know where the statutes have landed, barring something very surprising. So if there is something that is oh my gosh, it changed everything, there will be almost certainly an opportunity for you to correct.
We'll let you know.
you
There'll be a red light
screwed up.
and then
You in the loop on that, or we're just starting over again.
Redo.
Mulligan.
So the connected part of this is lot coverage. So, and building coverage. So, lot sizes can be whatever you
Mhm.
land, but if you maintain where they currently are at 20 and 40, I believe.
Generally, the R1 is actually 50
You
and
have
25.
essentially, and the setbacks of 30 feet front, 30 feet rear, 10 feet side.
You
No place to
You
build.
haven't actually changed anything.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Functionally. So, we did some analysis there. We just got it today. We can pull that up for you. There's a couple of ways to think about this. The draft statutes are looking at a number that would say total lot coverage, which is buildings, walkways, patios, and driveways
all impervious.
being,
Impervious
right,
surface.
all impervious being 50% being the number. That is pretty coincidental with what Burlington is looking at in
We're
their,
looking at 45 in their lowest scale.
so in the same neighborhood. Our pre-1974 standards were what?
30 and 50. 30 for
Fif-
building
I'm
and
just
50
talking
for
about
lot.
coverage for a second. So we have this oddity in our regulations that Kelsey highlighted, that any lot that was existing before 1974, which is most of
The smaller
Chamberlain, Mayfair Park, Queen City Park, others,
orchards.
they're subject to a different set of lot coverage and setback rules.
Yeah.
Even today. So you could rebuild the house on it entirely today. So 2/3 of the lots that are subject to this, they're in this one category, or are already allowing 50% lot coverage.
Yep.
For
Or 60.
So again, it's, yeah, if they're very small, it's 60, but there's, as we noticed, there's very few that, because I think you have to be under 5,000 square feet. So there's almost none of those.
So you were proposing just moving that standard to
There's
the
a two,
res-
kind of a twofold thing, moving it to everybody having the same standard and not having a pre and post 1974 question, which simplifies things, is frankly more transparent and more understandable, and more predictable for a homeowner. Because if you buy a new property, if you buy a home, you may not know when your lot, not the house was built, when the lot was created. So it's a whole thing. And whether that means bringing everybody to 30 and 50 or bringing everybody to something else, that's the sort of second question. So the first question is, do you want to bring everybody the same standard? And the second question is, do you want to bring everybody to 30 and 50? Or I raised in the memo the question of collapsing building and lot coverage into one number and just regulating lot coverage. That's an option. And
And then this Burlington approach of a impervious cover and then a building size
Cover and what?
and a maximum
footprint.
footprint of a building.
You collapse it, then the homeowner would choose how much of that 50% is impervious, and that might be building, playground,
Here might
driveway.
Right.
How that 50% is divided up.
I think so.
It's up to the land.
Gravel driveways? Will that bring back gravel drive?
Gravel
Well,
driveways
so
are
that's what I was
different.
gonna say is,
Yeah.
I think from my experience, if you were to just make it one number of impervious surface, it can be whatever. The unintended consequence of that could be that folks imagine on day one of their project, okay, I'm gonna build my house, I'm gonna do this, and my house is gonna be at 49.6, and then they come in a year later and they say, can I get a shed? And we say,
No.
nope, you've maxed it out. And then they get very mad at the city of saying, what do you mean I couldn't have a shed? Or what do you mean I can't have a patio?
Or what do you mean I can't have a driveway?
What do you mean I can't have a driveway? That kind of thing. And I realize that's not necessarily our problem. I'm just saying that that's the practical implication. You might want to have it separated out a little bit. But
It's hard to control people from not maxing out. In general, I mean,
right. Any builder.
having
will tell
worked
you
with a
that.
lot of properties, it's.
I will say from our, I would just had a little bit of time today looking at the lot coverage data that we got sort of at the beginning of the day today. There are actually a reasonable number of residential properties in these primarily single family home neighborhoods that are above 50. Whether it's a calculation error or because people are doing stuff they weren't supposed to, or
all of
they
the
were
above.
they were permitted under a different set of rules, or whatever
permit.
combination of things it may be. There's actually a reasonable number that are, 59.
I'd also take all of this data with a grain of salt.
Oh, yeah.
Because parcel lines are not precise. This is taking aerial imagery to try to figure out what is coverage and what isn't. So I looked at a couple of
Yeah.
these that were really low, and there was a tree over the driveway and
Yeah,
it
that
just
shaded it or something.
it shaded
show
it.
it,
So,
yeah.
so take this all with a grain of salt, but
But-
what we're seeing in here,
But the other thing I saw, just for a fun fact, because it's 9 o'clock, most of the lots that I clicked on that were in that highest sort of above 50 category have a pool
Have a pool.
of some kind. So whether or not that should be counted as impervious.
I
yeah,
bet it wasn't, I
it's
bet
a
it
po-
wasn't
it's
permitted.
water.
Yeah.
Well, no, there's
permitted,
they're
but-
in-ground ones.
Yeah.
There's definitely in-ground ones, but like the pool deck around,
Yeah.
like pools always, like an in-ground pool has, patio around it, so.
So just looking here at the Chamberlain neighborhood, this was, again, we just got the data today, but the yellow here represents less than 10%. The light blue is 10 to 30. The sort of bright blue that the airport is in is 30 to 40, which is what our maximum standard would be for lots today.
Mhm.
The dark blue is the 40 to 50, which is what is allowed for lots prior to 1974. And then there's a few of these gray ones. Ignore the ones along Williston Road. The data was given to us a little bit differently, so they didn't take out this isn't just the neighborhoods, this is citywide. But you see there's sort of a spread of them, and this reflects why probably the pre-1974 lots allowed for that. If you look in a different part of the city,
Long yellow lot.
this one here is a city-owned park. This is
Oh, that's the park, okay.
Garvey.
Okay.
If you look at, not surprisingly, neighborhood built in the 80s, where the standard became lower, the lots are typically in the 30 range, and sometimes some of them get closer to the 40. And this is, let's see, this one's 20%. Larger lots, 19%. Interestingly, in the golf course, where there are some fourplexes, or actually these are townhomes, it's higher. We'll go back to Paul's neighborhood, which again has a mash of all the different amounts of coverage. There's likely a relationship to lot size, but not always.
I added,
So Paul, do you have a big tree?
yeah, I've got a big.
Yeah,
His whole house is covered by trees.
by a big tree. There's no lot
It
coverage.
says here only 5% impervious, Paul. So you're doing, even before your heat pump, you're doing great.
I did an addition to my home, and I came in under the 1974.
Right.
Mhm.
Non-permitting issue.
I was able to add 5 feet, but not 6 feet.
Right.
And the lot coverage was pretty close to maximum.
Non-conforming, non.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
And
our
I
very
did
first take on
have a
this
tree
is,
that covers
it
that.
seems like the pre-1974 numbers would create a lot of equality
Yep.
of treatment.
Mhm.
We probably want to look at it maybe one more time through the lens of, now that you've decided on 5,000 square feet, about whether that needs to change anymore. The setbacks are also reduced in those pre-1974.
Right, which I outlined that in the memo.
I guess in light of the conversation we just had with moving the lot size down to 5,000 feet.
Yep.
Whatever would be comparable with the building and lot coverage to sort of. work
Something
with
that
I
makes
think. Yeah,
sense.
yeah.
Yep. Sort of what kind of home could you build,
Yeah.
and like with
Mhm.
a reasonable driveway and a deck?
Yep.
Yeah.
Like what is
Yeah.
that lot coverage number?
Mhm.
If you actually had like a 5,100 square foot lot. Yep.
Yeah, what,
Yeah.
what would be best served
What
to
can we
get
do?
what we,
You-
what we
If
want.
you
there.
reduce the lot coverage, you would incentivize smaller footprints or smaller buildings.
Mhm.
And more,
But at a 5,000 square foot house
no,
with a drive, I
Lot,
mean,
you
a
mean.
5,000 square foot
Lot.
lot and a driveway, you might end up only being able to have a 1,000 square foot footprint.
Right.
So
Which is a 2,000 square foot house if you make it 2 stories. But
Yeah.
the one thing that I wanted to point out with the lot and building coverage question is, when you do edge down in lot size to something like closer to 5,000, having maybe not even necessarily one number, but having the building number go closer to the lot number allows more flexibility. So if you decided that you wanted your home to be a little bit bigger, and you didn't care about having a shed or a patio or a longer driveway or whatever it was, you could have a home that's 35% and still meet the 50%. And maybe you still keep 40% as a building number if you wanted to to protect from Paul's issue of someone coming in a year later and wanting to put on a patio or something. But pulling those a little closer together allows some of that flexibility, instead of like in Paul's situation, being able to do 5 feet instead of 6 feet. If those numbers are tighter to each other, there's more flexibility in being able, homeowners, to make those decisions.
Mhm.
What if somebody wanted to do a green roof? Would that allow them to?
It's
do
still
larger
impervious.
building coverage?
It's still impervious surface.
Well,
It doesn't
It-
soak into the ground.
It actually does soak into the roof. Cause that's what a green roof is.
Sure,
Cause
but
it absorbs into the roof and it slows the water down so that it can drain off more slowly.
So today, and you can,
Commercial buildings,
right.
this is one of the reasons they do it.
so today, and you are all the stewards of the regulations, so you can write the regulations as you choose. Today, a building is building coverage, and all driveways, whether pavement or gravel, would be considered to be impervious surface. There, in the stormwater rules that the city has, when you get to some commercial lots, there are some ways of doing some designs that give you some stormwater credit because you pay your stormwater fees based on their version of impervious. So there can be some ways of doing gravel, but it has to be done in specific ways where the water actually gets through.
Mhm.
It's a tricky thing because, the data here calls it impervious. Water is one of the reasons to have it, but it's also a massing of building. And so that's sort of for you to, historically, South Burlington zoning about building and lot coverage has been probably, frankly, more about massing than it has been about water management.
Right.
But that's for you to decide if you want to do it differently.
Well, because water management does become a bigger issue when you get higher density. I mean, lived in towns that developed a lot of flooding because the hillside above got developed with a lot of big mansions. And all of a sudden they had flooding downtown, because they hadn't really mitigated for stormwater on all those big mansions and all those big driveways and things like that. So, I mean, it's an issue to contend with at some point.
So in terms of your question, the pre-1974 standard, are we comfortable with that?
at
The-
least with having us look
Yeah,
more
yeah.
into what does that mean
Okay.
at a 5,000 square foot lot,
Okay.
et cetera.
All right.
Conceptually, I think it's a great idea.
Um,
Can we do a straw poll on
Yeah.
that?
What was it?
okay, the
Three
straw poll,
people?
yeah. We would, have staff look into adopting the pre-1974 lot coverage and building coverage standards to be moved
For everything.
citywide to single-family lots, 5,000 square feet
And setbacks?
and setbacks.
Okay.
So everything will be,
Which
everything will become 1974?
Pre
We're
1974.
going back in time.
Yeah, what were the setbacks?
Did you talk about setbacks
Yep.
in the memo?
I did.
Yeah.
Didn't vote.
Did we do the straw?
Michael was,
The setbacks were, I wrote about it a little bit separately.
I know there was 30 feet proposal, 30 feet reduced to 15, somewhere in here.
For the rear, 5 feet for the side, and the average distance to the building line of the principal structures on adjacent
Which-
lots on the same street
that
frontage.
makes sense. That
So
seems-
kind of lining up with the average of your neighbors for your front setback.
Mhm.
5s for the sides and 15 for the rear.
Let me picture something.
Yep.
I've got a double-story house here.
Mhm.
Yep.
Where I am, and a double-story house where you are.
Yep.
This is 30 feet. That's the 215-foot setbacks. That's gonna be overpowering and shade everybody. I've experienced this myself in another place I've lived.
In Queen City Park, they're 15 feet apart.
Part,
There's, instead of 30 feet between them, there's 15 feet between them,
back to back.
side to
Mhm.
side.
Total.
Talk about side to side. We're talking about the rear setback.
Rear setback.
Okay.
It needs some,
Wait, rear setback was how much?
15 feet
15.
is what they're,
15 feet.
is what they're proposing.
Well, I mean, that gives you a lot of flexibility on how to use those rear yards that are unused now.
Michael, you're concerned that 15 feet is too little.
might be, yeah. I think I'm raising it as a concern.
Happy to, when I'm looking through the 5,000 square foot lot stuff with lot coverage, to also kind of mock up what these setbacks end up looking like? And can you, again, lot coverage plus the setbacks, like what,
And show what the if it's let's say an east-west lot.
this may be above my,
No, just look at the shading.
again,
What the shading of a 30-foot, two 30-foot houses, 30 feet apart, because 15 each. What would that look like? I know, I know this is asking a lot.
You're asking for a hypothetical on a hypothetical.
On the roof. You have to go to. Yeah, go to the flat. go to the
Yeah.
flat
Gives you a
roof.
good reason to have more south-facing front and rear yards.
I-
That way you don't have that concern.
No, no, it's 2 feet. We don't have a lot of places. here.
so those numbers were based on currently, if your lot is before 1974, your side and rear setbacks are 50% of the requirement for the district at large. So in the districts proposed to be consolidated into one, the side setbacks range between 10 and 25 feet, with the 25 only being in the R1, and the rear setbacks are always required to be 30. So if it's the same situation where if your lot was created before 1974, you
15
get
feet.
15. That's what the current standard is if you have an older lot. So it's just complying with the same thing.
Okay.
But I'm very happy to put that into my sort of sketch up of what things kind of look like, and I will do my best with the angle of the sun to see what kind of shading I can do. Well, the other thing that I put in is that there is a process in the 1974 exception for additional reduction in setback and you have to demonstrate some different things, and one of them is sort of shading and light and air and that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. You could have set the setback as something different and then include that kind of exception process as like you have to demonstrate something better to get closer to the rear setback. Like you have to demonstrate these additional things. That's just another option that you could have, set the rear setback to 20 and say you could get as little as 15 or 10 if you come in and you make a showing of these particular things that the DRB approves. You could do something like that where you have to sort of go one step beyond to earn it. But that's just another choice.
Keep it
Yes.
simple.
That's, our job is to make the DRB's life simple. That doesn't
Keep
make
it
their life
simple.
simple.
I'm just providing the option.
Correct.
You know where I stand on simplicity.
I think that, going back to, I think the proposal that you suggested about drawing it up, I think that's good.
Yep.
Yes, I think
Happy
we're
to.
in agreement with that. Do we still need the straw poll?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So everyone who's in favor of having Kelsey drop what we just talked about?
Yes.
Yeah,
All right.
Okay. So that's everybody.
so everyone unanimous. Mapping of habitat block and conservation PUD changes.
We can,
It's about
we can
9:15,
push
so
that out. That was
shut up.
just,
Okay,
Can I go home now?
yeah.
that's,
That
I'm
was-
working on it, Michael. I'm trying to get us there.
That was just an updated, when we at a previous meeting were showing like a blue dot or something on certain parcels, we did update the mapping based on wetlands and other things about hypothetically, like here's a good place to make a little trapezoid or whatever. So that was just going to be showing you that, but we don't need to do that today.
Well, and actually we weren't quite ready for it. I've been working on the mapping. Part of what you asked for was a tally of what's the net change. And so we are honing in
I think
on
Paul
those
asked for that,
numbers
yeah.
for you. They're not big. They're in the tens of acres, not total difference, not in the hundreds of acres, total difference. Overall. So
Alright.
we're feeling like it's not going to be a massive change.
All right, we have minutes to approve. The minutes of February 13th. We have all right, all in favor? Aye. All right, that's unanimous. Other business, real quick, did everyone see Kelsey's email about the change in dates? I believe we have a meeting on the 19th and the 26th.
26, back to back.
Okay,
weeks.
everybody saw that?
Woo.
Yep, okay.
Lori's
great.
like, forget it.
There was some other business, Winooski.
That was just when
Okay.
we get neighboring municipalities proposed amendments that are set for public hearing, they notify us, we notify them the same way, and therefore we pass it on to you all. So unless you have any specific questions about any of it, then that's just,
read
you
them
have
all.
been notified and you have the information in your packet.
We, oh, no,
Just one thing.
Yep.
At some point, I don't know when we would do it, but I'd like to begin talking about having building inspectors in South Burlington. Is there something within our purview?
I think that would be the council, wouldn't it?
I don't know.
Is it?
So I think that that would be something for if it's under the purview of council because it's not a zoning thing per se. I would say if individually or as a group you have a recommendation on that, that's something you could, when the council lays out their schedule of putting together their policy priorities for the next year of what they're going to work on, that either individually or as a group, you could recommend to them that that be something that they work on.
Mhm.
The only area that we do not have building inspectors today are for owner occupied single family homes. All other types of dwellings are subject to codes.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of discussion about this in the climate action plan because of the requirement for compliance and the need for more inspectors and more inspections. That's.
Well, and
what
then, and
I-
there's a whole other category
the
of
thermal-
energy inspection is not necessarily the same
Yeah.
thing as life safety inspection. And there's certainly some overlap, but it's not necessarily the
It was
same
in
thing.
thermal and energy section.
And Donna can talk to you about authority for that as well, which is a whole other complex.
We're not gonna go there now, though. All right, we are adjourned, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe it says vote early, vote often.
Yes, I don't know how much.
Paul Connor said.
Yeah, baby.